manned the streets. 1,500 undercover detectives prowl the docks in Covent Garden, including a director of the Bank of England, who disguised himself as a common labourer. Out of necessity, the sneaker was invented.
In common with hundreds of others, I was drafted there and we patrolled the streets, usually in pairs, without tangible result. We did, however, rather anticipate a great commercial invention. To our clumsy regulation boots, we nailed strips of rubber, and so ensured some measure of silence when walking.
Unfortunately, the inquiry was under two separate directions. The city police, with their involvement with Catherine Eddowes' murder, the one canonical murder that took place in the city, held a separate investigation, and although the two forces were supposed to liaise, and did liaise quite well at ground level, the chiefs didn't get on, and the chiefs did not properly exchange information.
Soon, citizens took matters into their own hands.
We know that the vigilante groups arrested people on the streets. We get accounts of people being taken to stations and obviously embarrassed police officers having to arrest sort of quite respectable gentlemen out on the street. Possibly, too, they released the Ripper on occasion. It's speculation, but nonetheless, it is something to be considered.
George Lusk, head of the Whitechapel Vigilante Committee, received a letter posted from hell, probably from the real killer. The syntax was clearly Irish, and the envelope contained parts of a human kidney.
Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half a kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate it, was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out, if you'll only wait a while longer. Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk.
32-year-old Irish-born socialist and critic George Bernard Shaw wrote one of his famous letters to the press. Less than a year ago, the West End was literally clamouring for the blood of the people hounding Sir Charles Warren to thrash and muzzle the scum who dared to complain that they were starving, behaving, in short, as the property class always does behave when the workers throw it into a frenzy of terror by venturing to show their teeth. Whilst conventional Democrats were wasting our time on education, agitation, and organization, some independent genius has taken the matter in hand. A murdering fiend called Jack the Ripper had killed 4 women. How many more would die before he was through?
It escalates. It constantly escalates. And we see this more clearly probably in the Ripper case than in anything else. The constant escalation of mutilation.
You've got the murderer. He's now working to some timetable of his own. It goes like this. 31st of August, he kills Polly Nichols. 8th of September, he kills Annie Chapman. 30th of September is a double event. He kills Stride and Eddowes. 8th of October, nothing happens. 30th of October, nothing happens. The night of the 8th, 9th of November, he meets his 5th and final victim. And this is this young prostitute called Mary Kelly. On the night of the 8th, 9th of November, it's raining, she's out on the street, she's looking for customers. She picks one up around about midnight, takes him back to her room, and one of the other prostitutes sees her drawing the curtains of her room, and as she did so, Kelly is singing a musical song. It was only a violet I plucked from my mother's grave. Around about 3:30 in the morning, she picks up the Ripper. Some people living in Miller's Court hear a faint cry of murder. It's almost certain that it was at that point that the Ripper, lying on the bed beside Mary Kelly, throws the sheet over her head and makes his first thrust through the sheet with a knife. And he has several hours to work over.
She had been absolutely savagely mutilated, almost cut to pieces, her abdomen entirely emptied and the contents left scattered around on the bed beside her. Pieces of flesh had been left on a table beside the bed. Her heart had been extracted from her thorax, and it is possible, from the way the doctor described this, that that was taken away.
There is the photograph of the murder. She's lying on the bed facing the window. You can just see the puff sleeves of her chemise. This is what confronts the police when they get there to begin the investigation.
News of Mary Kelly's savage death stunned the world.
Eine furchtbare Morde in London, in Whitechapel. Das ganze Stadt.
Nothing in
the history of American crime can, for special horror, be said to outmatch East End butchery.
The horrendous murder of Mary Kelly alarmed Buckingham Palace and greatly distressed Queen Victoria. She promptly telegrammed her Prime Minister with an urgent message. This new, most ghastly murder shows the absolute necessity for some very decided action. All the courts must be lit and our detectives improved. Sir Charles Warren, the beleaguered head of Scotland Yard, was already on his way out. The fifth Ripper murder sealed his fate, and he resigned.
That must have been another great high for him. I did all this. I caused this sensation. It's my doing. And again, it feeds the vanity and the arrogance.
12th of November, 1888. My name is Joseph Barnett. I reside at 20...
Mary Kelly's lover, Joseph Barnett, was summoned by the coroner to identify what was left of her decimated body.
I have lived with the deceased 1 year and 8 months. Her name was Marie Jeanette Kelly. I have seen the body. I identify her by the ear and the eyes.
Now, the Ripper had killed 5 women in ever-increasing acts of violence. Scotland Yard and the City Police kept extra forces on the street and continued to search for the Phantom of Death.
The police at the time were hampered. They were hampered by the fact that they had no experience of sexual serial murders. They had no files to look at. They had no reliable consultants who could come along and say, it'll be a man like this, look for this sort of man. They therefore were looking for the traditional madman, someone who was, say, foaming at the mouth or had a vacant stare.
If I was conducting an interrogation of this individual back then, I probably would focus in on the fact, if it was Jack, say, Jack, I know you got blood on you, Jack. I know you got blood on you. It's not a question of whether or not you did it or not. I know you did it, but I know you got blood on you.
I think you can say Jack the Ripper was cunning rather than clever. Clever he may have been, we just don't know. But certainly he had luck on his side and must have had a degree of animal cunning to escape the police net.
5 women had been brutally killed, and still nobody could name the man who had committed the crimes. 4 years later, in 1892, the file was closed on Jack the Ripper. 2 years later, Sir Neville Macnaghten, senior official of Scotland Yard, wrote a memorandum stating the 3 chief suspects he believed might have been the Ripper.
No one ever saw the Whitechapel murderer. Many homicidal maniacs were suspected, but no shadow of proof could be thrown on any case. I may mention the case of 3 men. Mr. M. Druitt, said to be of good family, who disappeared at the time of the Miller's Court murder, whose body was found in the Thames about 7 weeks after that murder. He was sexually insane, and from private information, I have little doubt that his own family believed him to be the murderer. Michael Ostrog, a Russian doctor and a convict, who was subsequently detained in a lunatic asylum as a homicidal maniac. Kuzminski, a Polish Jew and resident of Whitechapel. He had a great hatred of women, especially of the prostitute class. He was removed to a lunatic asylum in March of 1889.
Macnaghten's memorandum was published in 1915, and ever since, criminologists have debated its merits. Chief Anderson of the Metropolitan Police wrote that the Ripper had been positively identified. He was a local Jewish man, picked up after the final murder and put into an insane asylum. He could not be named or tried because he had gone insane and was unable to defend himself.
When you search the asylum records looking for an immigrant patient from Whitechapel who fits, there is only one who fits with the timing of the end of the murders, and that is a man called David Cohen, 23 years old, who was taken by the Metropolitan Police because he had had a fit of raving mania and they picked him up on the streets. He was taken by the police